Damn, I hate that voice. Okay, Dr. Miranda, thank you for coming to take some time to talk to me today.
Thank you. My
Really
pleasure.
appreciate it. Yeah, and I really enjoyed your book too. I've read it during this week, and it helped me to inspire me as I wrote the email to you, like to get new hope in life and like to reconnect with the enthusiasm and like dreams and stuff that I had as a 17-year-old. So that's been amazing, and I think it's also a good book because it's pretty light-hearted and it's not very like commanding. It's more inviting you to think.
Right. And how old are you now, if I may ask? You don't seem much more older than 17.
I'm 24 now, which
Yeah.
I guess everything is relative, but
Right, right.
yeah. Um, but I had some notes that I've taken and some quotes from the book, and I wonder if we could
Mm,
maybe bounce that off you.
sure.
Um, So I'll start from a little bit from the back, and then I'll start the other way around. But I was thinking about the African proverb, "I am because we are."
Mm,
I thought that was kind of interesting, because you come in the book, you compare that to the West, where we're very individualist, um, compared to the African way, which is more collectivist. Um, do you have any thoughts about that? Like, because it seems that we've kind of got it wrong in the West in a way with our individualism that humans are in our DNA. We are social beings, and so why would we ignore that?
mm. Right. And this example that you mentioned is from the part of the book called The Sense of Belonging.
Yes.
Is one of the six elements of philosophical health. So by itself, this shows that I consider that belonging is important. And actually, my PhD is on collective intelligence and that sense of commitment that people have that is called esprit de corps, really strong loyalty to a group that represents a higher purpose. And
Mm.
and of course, so there's different levels in that. Of course, there's no such thing as a fully autonomous, independent person. Right
Yeah.
now, we're
Yeah.
using English language. And neither you or I invented English language. So already we are in a collective process. We inherit
Mhm.
this language from um, many people around us and in the past.
Do you
Uh,
think that affects us? That we're using someone else's language? Do you think that affects the way we think? Like that someone invented the words that are in our minds?
right. I mean, of course, because most people don't really know who they are. So they are embedded in ideologies, in cultures, in values that they inherit.
Yeah.
That's why, just to finish my answer on the first question, it of course is
Yes.
important to recognize that we are interconnected, but it's also important to realize that the self does exist,
Hmm.
not the consumeristic self that we see encouraged by Western capitalism, and you mentioned that form of individualism that is very much based on competition. So I think
Yeah.
the balance is between, and the sense of self is another element of philosophy. The balance is between having enough autonomy that one knows who they are, and as a person, you can stand for something
Mm.
and remain unshaken in the tempests of everyday life, where like, I'm going to give you an example of
Yeah, please.
where the collective can become actually a toxic uh, form of immersion. I uh, I am the only social network in which I am is LinkedIn, which I
Mm.
actually find more reasonable than others. And so I haven't been on Twitter for a while, and since it was bought by Musk and X.
Yeah.
The other day, I just reconnected. I had a reason for doing that, but I forgot. But I did reconnect, even if it were curiosity, it would be a valid reason. And suddenly I was submerged by a flow of chaotic noise.
Yeah.
That day, and I suppose every day is a different noise, right? That day
Yeah.
was about, oh, is this Olympic
Yeah.
competitive
The ritual, the
man or
opening
human?
ceremony. Yeah.
It was like so much, trash of everything. It was like the entire world shouting at me. I immediately disconnected myself, and I thought, okay, this is clearly not for me. Uh,
Mm.
so so yes, so I think the one of the exercise of philosophical health is to have a balance between the desire for autonomy, which is very philosophical, think for yourself, and know what we stand for. And I do actually that it's possible to find ourselves. Like Nietzsche said, become who you are. But it's an
Yeah.
act that is also an act of creation. It's not that yourself is hidden there like an object and you're gonna be an archaeologist and find it. It's a dialectic between, yes, traits that are inherently revealed in your biography, but also decisions that you make,
Hmm.
higher values that you stand for. So the self is half created, half discovered. Like
But can
for
I challenge you a little bit on that?
yes,
Because you said the self is not like an archaeologist with a brush finding the skeleton, but I think to some degree you're right. But also it is, if you look at our genes and our personality and our temperament. Like I was studying psychology a little bit, and then I dropped out. But before I dropped out, we learned that that temperament and stuff is very much a genetic thing that we are born with, and you can't really change your personality and your temperament. And by temperament, I mean like some babies take longer time to calm down, for example, after they've been sad or something like that.
Mhm. Have you done the studies yourself?
The
Uh,
psychology studies,
have you
or
done
oh, I mean
those
the
studies yourself? No, right? No, but I
no.
think there is an ideology, a eugenistic ideology that would like everything to come from the genes. And
Mm.
there was recently a program on SVT that was extremely biased in
Swedish
the sense.
television.
Yes, for those who don't know, but
Yeah.
it was extremely biased in the sense that it was defending the fact that our personality is in our genes, but
Hmm.
no showing no interest for the opposite views.
Environmental.
It's
Yeah.
extremely debated. I and I said precisely that I think that the self is half discovered, half created. So
Mm.
I do think that we inherit more from our education, more for how our culture and our parents treated us. There might be, of course, genetic traits that we share with all living beings, right?
Yeah.
Properties that we can unfold and others not. It's about, of course, the actualization of potential. So, for example, my body did not have the potential in its program to reach 2 meters high for
Mm.
uh, historical reasons and geographical reasons, etc., etc. Does that affect my personality? Some people might be affected by the fact that they
Yeah.
feel they are too small or too high or too tall, etc.
Mm.
But it is also a a result of a long training that these things that are genetic do not affect us. It's not
Mm.
easy. A lot of people are affected by their hormones, for example.
Yeah.
It is a long journey. Here's what I think would be a nice answer. The older you get, the more you have a chance, if you do things properly, to be less influenced by your genes. And this is not what psychology would say. This is more my philosophical health perspective. But
Mm. Mm.
I think that today, in fact, we have two phases in our life.
Yeah.
We have a first, and because most of us, and you certainly, but I actually believe also myself, we're going to live till 100. So we have two phases until 50, and then the second phase. That second phase did not exist not so long ago, 100, 200 years ago. So the first phase is the first 50 years, we learn, we experiment, we experience, we try different directions. It's a process of learning. We make mistakes, etc., etc.
Like 90% or 95% of humanity probably only got to experience that first, like part one of the game.
Right, because a lot of then people after 50, because they were used to die, programmed genetically to die. So there's no cognitive function that says, wait a minute, we need to do something. And then philosophy, which I believe actually can be seen as a mutation of the human species, but so recent, like it's 2000 years. That's nothing
Mm.
in the evolutionary time. So that's a
Yeah.
mutation that says, and Plato clearly says, philosophy is a preparation to death.
Mm.
So the second part, most people decline after 50. And and that could be explained in evolutionary terms because, well, we would die if not been dead already at 50. But now that we have this extra 50 years, which is basically an extra life from
Mm.
that perspective, what are we going to do about it? And this is where I believe philosophical health comes into play, not a genetic
Yeah.
program, but a program where we fully co-create our conditions for a
Yeah.
more meaningful life.
Yeah, it's a good point. It's a good point because if you would compare individual A that has no philosophy on life and that is kind of lost, and to person B who has a philosophy for life and sees himself as, somewhere in the larger picture, um, in the last 50 years of one life, that's where that's going to be more noticeable than in the first 50.
Right. And
Yeah.
there's science of purpose. I mentioned it and I analyzed some examples in my book. There's a site about it. I think it's scienceofpurpose.com, where actually the findings of psychology. So if you hadn't dropped out, I think philosophy has different trends. I don't want to give the impression that it's only reductionist and only based on some sort of anti-spiritual views. There are
Mm.
a lot of results in psychological results in on purpose that show that individuals with a purpose in life and a higher purpose, they benefit from all sorts of um, collateral benefits, like they live longer, they have less Alzheimer, better memory, and all other forms of benefits that, of
Yeah.
course, stand for a better quality of life.
Right, right. Yes. Can I ask you one thing before I forget? Um, Long time ago, when we first connected through one of your sessions, um, we were talking. We just touched briefly upon a topic of expectation anxiety or anticipatory anxiety or something. Do you remember that? And do you think you could share your thoughts on that topic? Because it's something that I've been struggling on personally in my life, and just wanted to touch on that before I forget.
Right.
Um,
Yeah, and so the people who listen to us might so you use a term that is a little bit scientific.
yeah,
They might think, oh, I kind of feel what it is. But if you give an example, if you
yes,
say what it means for yourself, in what
yeah.
concept do you might feel that form of anxiety?
So I guess like anxiety as a term in general refers to the future rather than the past. At least that's how I understood it. And then maybe anticipatory anxiety is a redundant term because anxiety is already saying that it's the future, and anticipation is also future.
Right.
But so what it would mean as an example would be that, like, let's say you have something big coming up. It's Monday. You have something big coming up on like Thursday. And then you're so much in ahead already and like going through the scenarios when you really can't do anything about it because you're
Right.
not there. So no matter how good your solution is in the present, you're still gonna not be able to solve the issue
Mm.
because you can't. It's not the time yet.
Right. Right.
um, and so I would my issue would be like, let's say I have a an exam. I was in med school for a while. Let's say I have an exam on Thursday. Monday night I think about it, Tuesday night I think about it, Wednesday night I think about it, and it kind of steals a little bit of the life joy
Mm.
from the other days.
Right. Yeah, there's a lot in what you're saying, and we will talk about joy perhaps a bit later, but it might be a good term, in fact, anticipatory anxiety, if we compare anxiety to anguish. So in psychoanalysis, there is this idea that anguish is more something that you feel, but you don't really know why. So it has
Mm.
no object. And
Right, right.
or in the theory of Jacques Lacan, who was French follower of Freud, he says, well, anguish is this feeling that everything might look good in your life, but your unconscious is telling you you're not fulfilling your deepest dream, deepest desire. So you have this sense of a little bit guilt, anguish, emotions. We
Mm.
label them, but they are often in betweens.
Mm.
Now, anxiety with an object might be connected to the fact that uh, younger generations, especially who have grown up uh, very much immersed in digital worlds,
Yeah,
they are trained, their brain is trained to have immediate gratification or very quick gratification
yeah.
through digital prompts and cues, etc. And so I think patience is an issue. Has been an issue for all humanity. It's not something new, right? But
Mm.
now, how do you solve this kind of things? Well, the brain, as we know, is not very good at negation. So if you say, I should not think about my exam, you're gonna, right? It's a way of thinking about it. So,
Yeah.
a good proven way to be a little bit less in false problems is when, precisely as we said before, when you have a higher purpose. So this overview, this big picture intention that
Mm.
sort of relativizes the short terms. So there's nothing wrong in caring about an exam, right? When it's important, especially when it's part of the higher purpose.
Yeah.
And by the way, I have a lot of young people that are very interested in defining a sense of purpose who confuse a career with a higher purpose. So a
Yeah.
career is often a strategy. Becoming a doctor might be a
Mm.
strategy for a purpose, but it's not in itself a purpose, it's a goal.
Right. Right. Yeah.
So if the particular goal that is worrying the person does not match the higher purpose, but provided that we know what the higher purpose,
Mm.
then we can have a much more detached.
But I don't think from I understand your point, but for me, I wouldn't say that's the case, at least. Um, like I have it with all types of things, even those who are very much aligned with what I deem to be my purpose.
Right. Yeah, and again, I think that it's kind of healthy to have a little bit of care and worry about things that are
Mm.
important for you.
Yeah.
The question is, if you also have that for things that are minor, then someone could ask you, are you sure about that higher purpose? In a way that it's so embodied and internalized that, see, I'm making this, that you will actually really be able to relativize, to prioritize, or is the fact that you're not prioritizing in the way you allocate your anxiety a
Mm.
sign that you need to work on this sense of purpose such that it, for example, is not just an idea, but something that is actually embodied in you. That's one of the
Yeah.
things that, um, because we are creatures of habit, and even in
Hmm.
what we think, so it's very difficult to speak of something that uses common words that are meant to have a different meaning than the usual meaning. So when I say philosophy,
Mm.
a lot of people might think of abstract thinking, ivory tower, analytic philosophy, disconnected with action, etc., etc. That's how many,
Right.
and that's how, in some cases, philosophy is practiced.
But
And
from the book, I understand that by philosophy you mean a much more concrete plan and visualization of your life in a successful, happy way.
and active. So philosophy for
Yeah.
me is a way of doing things. So, and of course it involves thinking, but it involves a sort of harmony, if not actually integration between action and thought, which means then that philosophy will be embodied. So
Mm.
whatever higher purpose and philosophical sense one has, over time, it actually it's in your blood, almost like.
Yeah.
And
But also if you have a very clear vision for your life or a philosophy, a very clear philosophy for your life, then that would tie up with your actions also, so they become indistinguishable. Is that what you mean?
yes, there is an alignment
Yeah.
between your behavior or actions and your thoughts. That's actually the ideal. Of course, no one is a superhero. We might still make mistakes, and it takes
Right.
a journey. It's a long process to
Yeah.
many years to achieve a state where I can say, yes, I am, I know fully what I stand for, and my actions are the most important actions are aligned, but there might be minor actions that someone could say, oh, this is not aligned for some reason,
Right.
right?
Like you lose discipline for a day and you slip up on your long-term goals.
Or that or practices like, let's give you an example. The philosopher Wittgenstein liked to read thriller novels, like cheap, train station novels because he
Mm.
relax. He would spend the day so much, doing so much heavy brain work that he would relax with it. And
Mm.
I also, not to hide behind someone's biography, it happens that I relax with a Hollywood action movie, right?
Yeah.
And is it philosophically healthy to see a Hollywood action movie? Well, we can discuss that. It might be philosophically healthy if it's just, a way to rest your brain, right? We know that basically, we are animals, so our eyes like to follow movement. It's like
Mm.
the cows watching trains pass by. That's what an action movie is, right? So it actually does something to the brain.
Yeah.
You know, for example, that when we dream at night and when we are in deep sleep, it's what we call REM, rapid eye movement.
Yeah.
And so the eyes are moving back and forth, like when we're watching an action movie, right?
Yeah.
And there's actually a form of therapy called eye movement therapy. I don't know if you heard of it.
No.
And it's actually have evidence-based. I mean, apparently they have a lot of studies that show it works, where basically you go to the therapist and instead of having a philosophical conversation like with me, he would look at my fingers and think about your problem, and I would just move my fingers like this, make your eyes move. And and apparently it kind of works. Like it sort of resets some neuron structures in it. It restores. So there are a lot of things we don't know, basically,
Yeah.
and it's fascinating to still discover that. But
Mm.
meantime, I think it's important to stand for something such that we are not, precisely because we are in a society where we learn so much every day about everything. We want to be able to have a filter such that there are things that do not even enter our consciousness,
Mm.
like I mentioned with the X experience.
Yeah, yeah. By the way, another thing that I don't want to forget to ask. So when I was studying at the psychology program in Sweden, the professor there mentioned that in Norway it's pretty common that you kind of alternate going to a psychologist and a like philosopher. Is that anything you know from the philosophy perspective
So I've
or heard
been to
about?
Norway and I've discussed with the people who are engaged in philosophical practice there. And the reality is a bit more complicated and not as positive, unfortunately. What happened
Mm,
is that philosophical counseling was strong in Norway a few years ago, and it kind of went down. It was taught at university, and you could do a master in it. That disappeared, as far as I know, last time I checked. And the reason for that is actually a good transition to explain why I wrote the book I wrote, and which is based on a method
yeah,
I defined.
please.
So, philosophical counseling sort of re-emerged in human history in the 80s. It was practiced by the Greeks and the Romans, of course, people who could afford it, aristocrats. And then in the 80s, a few people started practicing it in Germany, the USA, a bit Norway later, etc. And if
The
you
counseling in particular.
philosophical counseling,
Yeah,
yes,
yeah,
philosophical counseling, which was often called beyond method. So most philosophical counselors might have a style, but they do not really have a step-by-step method. They just, and this is how I started. When I started in 2018, I have a background also in psychoanalysis, which helped me, but I was basically having conversations. And I think you experienced one session. And it
yes,
worked, but what I realized is that, well, if there's no method, there's no standard. And it's very dependent on the personality of the counselor and how good it matches with the personality
yeah.
of the counselee. And as I was doing a study which was published and with people living with spinal cord injury, with having a good life, their community identifies them as having a good life, and yet they are 95% physically paralyzed. But in my interviews, I wanted to understand, was there a philosophical health reason why you managed to have a good life with such a condition? And first, the interviews were quite undirected. And then I
Mm,
realized there is a form of epistemic injustice in this because if you ask people too directly, okay, so what's your philosophy of life? It's like taking them on a helicopter on top of Mount Everest. We want to climb the mountain slowly, otherwise we will have even breathing problems, etc. So I realized, okay, we need a much more gentle method to help people really arrive at the definition of a sense of purpose and philosophical worldview after a process. And so this is where I created this method, which I follow in the book. I have 6 chapters. And what I realized is that the results were much more fine grade, and the people who went through the method then were much more capable when they arrived to this more complex stages to be articulate and clear. Even people, which is most people who do not have, who are not trained in philosophy.
mm,
So this is why I start the method, which is called the SMILE PH method, sense making
right.
interviews looking at elements of philosophical health. I start with the bodily sense, our relationship with our body, then the sense of self, then the sense of belonging. We talked about belonging. Then the
Mm,
sense of the possible,
mm,
which I found, by the way, in that study that it was really high in the people living with a spinal cord injury that could have a good life. They had a very high
that's
sense.
crazy.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
very interesting.
Yeah, it's counterintuitive because and it was not understood by the doctors that I did the study with and that usually deal with people in rehabilitation. And the problem with that is that these doctors might say, you have a high sense of the possible. You are in denial.
Hmm.
Can't move 95% of your body. And that's
Yeah.
extremely bad. It's like it's very dangerous to tell someone with a high sense of the possible that they are in denial because it's a confusion of two levels of discourse. One is the realistic level of discourse. The other one is the ontological, philosophical level of discourse. So what they were saying, of course, they were not saying, "Oh, I'm on a wheelchair, I'm going to start flying." What they were saying was much deeper. It was about not even just willpower. It was about this really feeling that, well, the realm of the possible
Mm.
is an invisible realm that is much richer than what the world has to offer with its norms. So what we usually see as a world, as a society, is just 0.01% of what could be, right? So it's
Yeah.
about exploring new forms of life, and we all have uh, handicaps. Of course,
True.
we don't want to make a hierarchy of handicaps, but I think that the core is that the sense of the possible can be high with people that have that condition that is difficult, and it can be low with people who appear to have everything that they should have, what is considered successful.
Yeah. But do we know a definite answer why these handicapped people have this large sense of the possible? What could it be? Or you can answer that first.
Yeah, I mean that's a good question for more research. Why? But I have an answer
Uh,
to that, which
yeah.
is the following.
Hypothesis
Yes,
or answer?
it's an hypothesis based on my cosmology, so my explanation for how the universe is how it is. So
Hmm.
I call it the source of the universe. I call it the creal, so the creative real. This is typical of process philosophies, by the way. So we can talk about other philosophers who had similar views, or even traditions like Taoism, etc. But it's the idea that at the core in the universe is not matter, but uh, possibility. There's sort of a flow of possibles, of which only uh, a tiny percentage is actualized. So why they had that is, well, they were simply well connected with the truth of the universe. So that's good news because, and I do that exercise with counselees, but also in groups. I call it creeling. So it's
Hmm.
this reconnection with this creative source that we can feel, not just conceive in our minds. So, of course, can I prove it? Well, a lot of the scientific discourse tends to agree with what I just said. If you look at evolutionary theory, for example, it's saying that over long periods of time, there is a creative process, and the form
Yeah.
life takes are potentially infinite. Of course, there are constraints, and I'm not saying that in this, I'm not saying everything is possible doesn't mean that everything that is possible will happen. I think we'll have time later to explain what I my distinction between possible and compossible, right?
Yeah.
Uh, but indeed, the fact is that there is a condition in which we are that is a condition of abundance at the origin, but not material abundance, right? But abundance of a possibility that we can
Hmm.
tap into. So that's very good news for all sorts of conditions. And
Yeah.
I could tell you other examples where I had counselees who came to me with a narrative that they had ADHD and that they were diagnosed with it when they were 12 and therefore they could not focus and the
Yeah.
extremely good work has been done with that where people basically define their identity not in terms of this diagnosis, but in terms of actually what they can do. And in that particular case, this involves showing the person that in fact this person was focusing. I could tell you in more details the example
Hmm.
later if it's interesting for you.
Yeah. But about the handicapped people, I'm just thinking that could it be the reason that they have more a sense of the possible is that they've been they've been limited so much by life compared to other people. Yet, despite that huge limitation, they see that, oh shit, I can still do things in my life and I can still make it
Right.
better. Could it be something with that, do you think?
It's an interesting idea that is connected also with sort of a energetics, right? So, like, let's say that if our degrees of liberty are strong, and by degrees of liberty, I mean things we can do in our so-called normal state, then it could be that we are diluted. I see
Mm,
that a lot in people under 40 today. Is like they feel that so much, they have so many options,
mm,
they are kind of paralyzed by choice.
yeah,
So if
exactly.
suddenly you concentrate the domain of the choice, then it could be that creates this sort of explosive energy in some cases.
Yeah,
However, what I found in the studies that a lot of it was actually conscious. So it's not just an energy that is there and oh my God, I have this energy. It's also the result of a process of reflection. So there was some philosophical reasoning involved about, for example, something that's very important is what is normal, right?
no, is that a question or a metaphorical question?
Uh, yeah, I mean, I'm not asking you now in particular. They were asked, this is the kind of questions you ask yourself if suddenly
Mm,
you are considered not normal, right, by society. So it put them in a philosophical state where they were not philosophers. What philosophers do is that they anticipate that. So they are constantly having thought experiments in order to expand their mind. We're talking about
yeah,
mind expansion, I think, before we started recording, but this is one of
right,
the things in which philosophy is like a drug. Is like, what
right.
if, what if I am in fact in a simulation, etc., etc.
It's cool because in a way it's like you're experiencing things without having to actually go outside the door and like make your own mistakes. You can kind of have a simulation in your head. You know what I mean?
Yes, it's partly true, but because we are social beings, you're still going to go out of your door. And I encourage
Yeah.
you out of your door with these experiments. With my counselors, I sometimes do that in a way that is not dangerous, but I think that you're going to have, for example, let's say you convince yourself that, sorry, I'm catching something. Let's say you convince yourself that you are actually living in a computer simulation,
Hmm.
okay? And you want to validate or invalidate that thought. So if you just stay home playing with your computer, it's gonna tend to validate your thought. But
Yeah.
if you think carefully, okay, what does that entail? So you sort of derivate a few consequences of that worldview. For example, that you should be able to see glitches because there's this theory that you cannot compress completely. So at a certain point, you will see holes in the matrix. Okay, you go out and you go to, I don't know, to an event or you just go for a walk or you meet people. And then suddenly you're playing this game and you're looking for glitches. You're looking
Hmm.
you're gonna see things differently. Maybe you're gonna hear your friends, listen to them better. You're gonna see their faces differently, etc. So I think that it's again, it's thought experiment doesn't mean only that you are only in your mind. It's a constant process of testing ideas, also with the world, and this can be done. Of course, it can be a little bit dangerous, right? So, for example, for your couple life, um, or your work life if you go to work, etc.
Mm.
Life without danger is quite maybe tasteless.
Yeah, yeah, true. Hmm. Do you think I could ask some questions from the notes that I've written from the book? Because I have so many
Yeah, yeah,
things that I wanted to ask you, and I don't think we're gonna be able to go through all of them, so I'll have to pick
yeah.
up some good ones. Um, you wrote in the book like this: had I had the opportunity to engage with a philosophical counselor during my 20s, I might have avoided some numerous missteps and some suffering. Perhaps more direct paths could have been taken to reach my current state of mind. I just thought that was a pretty um, cool quote because it's interesting that we could maybe reach more directly our goals without having to go through unnecessary suffering.
Yeah. No, I do think that the clearer you are about what you stand for, the more you avoid noise in your life.
Mm,
Noise that is sometimes noise that comes at you, but that can be motivated by experiences that you engage in. Uh, Sometimes you're like, should I do this? Should I not do this? So if you are like 50-50, because we are in a time where ideologically, and this might have changed, but when I was 20, it was in the 80s, 90s. So the ideology of the West was try new things. Maybe it's
yeah,
still the case today. So if you're 50-50, you're going to try, and sometimes you're going to bang your head on the wall, right? Or have a bad experience and realize this was really not for me. So, of course, if you do that work of philosophical health earlier, it's not that you're going to become a monk. You're going to still experience these things, but much more aligned with what your purpose is and what you have identified of who you
mm,
are. And of course, the process is still on, but at least you eliminate mistakes. We also know that, see, today I'm quite, but also I think in my book, I try to not engage in the usual conflict between science and philosophy. So I give a lot of examples that are scientific. And we do,
absolutely.
for example, that the prefrontal cortex is only finished around the age of 30, which explains now why we do a lot of irrational things until then, when we're
Yeah.
teenagers, also in our 20s. And so, had I known that, perhaps I would have also. But this is probably actually, I think this is a finding that came after I turned 30, right?
Mm,
So I think this is extremely interesting, and it connects to what I said before about, I think today, also because we're very protected, like we are sort of eternal teenagers or sort of this teenage mind, we prolong it till 30s, 40s. So yes, so of course, until 50, a lot of people experiment in many directions. I mean, it's not without pain, right? I mean,
mm,
there are separations, and I was kind of protected, and honestly, I there are very few things that I regret. Maybe nothing if we really dig into it, but it's
mm,
I was lucky enough to have an unconscious, a sort of a non um, explicit knowledge that was kind of always protecting me, such that I took the right decisions, even though I was not aware always they were the right decision. And I think that protection is not completely irrational. It is my long-term admiration for philosophy since my teenagehood.
yeah. Yeah.
So, so admiration is a great tool, not envy, but admiration. Very often with my counselees who are like, oh, but I don't really know what my purpose is. We engage in exercise of considering what do they really admire, because
Mm.
very
That was a
often,
good one.
yeah, in what we admire, there is a strong resonance with what is important for us and who we are.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was thinking also while I was reading the book, like as I've been going from chapter to chapter, you introduce a lot of um, new philosophies, whether it's like Buddhism or like Kant or whatever, and you give a lot of examples from all over the world and from different times in history. Is that to kind of make your point in the book, or is that to kind of provide the reader with what he or she feels connected with?
Definitely the second, because
Okay.
I think that if I were a little bit only selfish and trying to make my point, I would just pretend that nothing exists before me, which, by the way, there's a lot of people like that today, even on if we are on YouTube now. So reinvent the powder.
Yeah.
So I think there is a respect towards the reader and a respect towards tradition to say, well, this has been well thought of by such philosopher or such tradition before. And also, I wanted to show that traditions of thinking are not necessarily Western philosophy. I wanted to give also examples of non-Western traditions or forms of thinking that are not necessarily conceptual, like myth and uh, and others, to show that this search for a meaningful life is something that is basically universal. But
Yeah.
yes, it's a book that I wanted to be pedagogic, such
Hmm.
to that it's a friendly reading for people who are not who have never studied philosophy.
Yeah. I think you did a good job.
Thanks.
And and I think it definitely invites the reader to kind of get at least accustomed with the ideas. And yeah, let's move on because I have so much I want to ask. What did you think about Plato's Republic, by the way? You mentioned that briefly in the book.
Yes. Well, that's such an interesting read because uh, I mean, first of all, it is an essential text of Western tradition. So just for that reason, we should read it. And it's about precisely that time where this philosophical mutation happens. At the same
Is
time,
that
mhm,
sorry? Is that the book where he's like encouraging to ask questions instead of giving the answers, like when he's talking with someone?
that would be all of his books because in
Oh,
all of the books that we have from him that remain,
mm,
he has a character, Socrates, who is asking,
right, right. Yeah,
even in
I
the
was thinking
Republic,
of the Socratic dialogue approach.
exactly.
Yeah, yeah.
But in the Republic, he considers, okay, so what is the perfect political organization? So it's really interesting because it could be seen as a sort of fascism, because he has these very dogmatic views on how it should be organized. For example, he believes that children that are with their parents, they are destroyed, and that therefore all the children should be taken from their parents at birth and educated all together. So you never know who
Mm.
is your children, who is not your children. So you treat everyone the
As a
same.
village
Right. He
property.
has these things that seem very strange to us, but might in the end be wise. But no, I think it's an interesting book. The main message is that he's trying to make us think about paradise on earth.
Right.
That's the great proposal of philosophy as opposed to religions. Religions are often about paradise after death, paradise
Hmm.
somewhere.
Yeah, that's what I always tell my religious friends. Like, what if this is the paradise? And
Right.
they're like, it can't be because there's evil. But then you need evil for good to exist, is what I would answer them in that case. Like, you
Right.
wouldn't be able to
And
distinguish good from evil otherwise if there was no like black and white.
yeah, no, that's a good point. I hope the world we live in today is not paradise, is not the best of possible worlds. I don't think it is.
But maybe
I do think
paradise,
that we can create the best of possible worlds on Earth. So
right?
I believe that we can create paradise on earth, probably as something that we approach eternally, right? An asymptotic approach. But
Yes, that's what I
basically,
mean.
yeah,
Like maybe paradise contains the the opportunity to make it better.
exactly. Yeah, no, but you're right. So, of course, evil and good are experiences that go hand in hand as the two sides um, of the same coin, right? Uh,
Mm,
and in political tradition, we often say that philosophy is about the good life. It's a sort of a phrase, the good life, right? Now, in my view, in order to avoid norms and normativism about what is a good life, how you should live and how you should not live, I focus on what I call eudaimonia. So Aristotle was Plato's student. He had this very famous idea of eudaimonia. And so today this is translated as flourishing. The real translation is yo, good, daimonia, spirit. Is the diamond. They had this idea that each of us had a personal spirit that would inspire us. A little bit like I said about the unconscious, having an unconscious that might be even smarter than us, a connection with the divine also. So your daimonia would be having a good relationship with your spirit. Now, your dynamia, as I define it in philosophical health, it's good, and dynamia in Greek, in ancient Greek, and in Aristotle's philosophy is the potential. So it's a good relationship with your potential. So then it's your responsibility to what you do with your possibles is your responsibility, right? But we need to start with a good um, sense of the possible for humans and for non-humans. So it is non-normative view. That's why I wouldn't write like Plato a this idea of a book that defines exactly what should be done to have the perfect society. But I would insist on the fact that first of all living beings should have this eudaimonia, and
mm,
it's not, the possible is not enough. This is what I promised to talk about a bit earlier. What we need is compossibility. And since we're talking about making the world a better place, uh, it's the moment where we should cite, not name drop, but bring Leibniz, who was a German philosopher, 18th century, famous for saying that uh, the divine is sort of trying to optimize the best of possible worlds at every moment. He was a mathematician. He wasn't
mm,
really understood. So people made fun of him because they thought he was saying that we live in paradise now. And then a famous book by Voltaire, Candide, show, okay, is this paradise? Children are dying. Earthquakes are destroying entire cities, etc. But Voltaire missed the point. What Leibniz meant is that to make a world, you need possibles, but you also need these possibles to be compossible, to be compatible. And this is a dynamic process that we can participate in. And this was Leibniz's hypothesis, which I share completely, is that the Creel, that creative source of the universe, is actually trying to compossibilize. It's a harmonizing force. But because it is the sort of jewel, like you said, that evil and good are connected, I think that the one and the multiple, which is a big deal for the ancient Greeks, are also connected in the sense that, well, that multiplicity of possibles that is the creel is also a unity, the creel. So
mm,
in fact, the engine of the universe is that jewel, which is one, basically, reality of the one and the multiple that we have in us. Because we all have in us that on the one hand, we feel that we are multiple and we like this multiplicity. But on the other hand, we aspire to unity and coherence. And And when we go too far in one direction or another, our life is disbalanced. And so the idea is to have what Aristotle called the golden mean, is this balance between both being unified, but leaving the windows open enough to not become petrified, so to still learn, expand, and grow.
Right, right. Okay, I'll move on to the next one. You say that thinking brings existential coherence. Could you like clarify what you mean by that?
Well, this connects to what I just said about unity. So
Mm,
most of the time, we are too much, people today are too much on the side of the multiple, especially in Western societies. In more traditional societies, it was different, but if we focus on Western society, so the this coherence that we try to work, this sort of unification of the self, is extremely important. It's done through a constant process of reflection, of foundational grounding on values, but also explanations for our actions. And it's not at all what is usually called in some psychological approaches. They speak of overthinking. What they really mean is worrying
yeah,
or ruminating,
yeah,
but you can never overthink. Uh, we are
right.
all under our potential for understanding things.
Yeah. And does that even qualify as thinking if you're uh, like if your reaction or not, it's not a reaction, but if you're like it's not your decision, it's not a conscious decision to think, it's just like you're receiver of the thoughts that worries you. Is that really like qualifying as thinking?
I agree with you that that's why I said it was more worrying or ruminating or indeed reacting. It's a beginning of thinking probably, but most people believe they are not good enough or they're not equipped to really try to articulate this and organize and try to see where it stands in
Mm,
a higher perspective. So it, I mean, in some cases, uh, it can be particularly saddening to see how it's difficult for so many of us to give away bad habits, which are often ingrained in fear.
yeah.
So then comes the question, and is actually a question, do I have an answer to that? I think I do. It might be that we need love to think. And it's interesting because philosophy means the love of wisdom, right? And
Mm,
that's a minimal thing. So you need at least to love wisdom in order to start your process towards it. Admire wisdom. But it
mm,
might be also that coming back to your I am because we are, I do think that it's important that we feel supported
yeah.
emotionally. So so there's an element, that's why we need counseling. That's why we need philosophical counseling, right? Because it's a lot of people tell me, "Oh, you're like a friend to whom we can talk to." And I mean, we are in a world where friendship has been, commodified, right? It started with
Mm,
Facebook. Now I saw that there's a new AI called Friend,
mm.
so people try to make a lot of money based on our need for
Camaraderie and
yes,
yeah,
exactly, a form of intelligent love, I would say, right?
yeah.
So I think philosophers are also people who were in communities, very much so. It's a bit lost today. And the question I ask is, of course, some people today, they start thinking about their life after something bad happens to them, right?
Yeah,
A huge separation or they lose their job.
depression.
Exactly. So in loneliness. So
Yeah,
then thinking is associated with loneliness.
yeah,
And as soon as they get less lonely, I don't know, they might start partying or considering, oh, now I don't need to think. But I would suggest no, actually, thinking is probably healthier if it stays connected with love and some form of belonging.
that's interesting. Seems to me that like a lot of our problems today arise from, or could rather be solved if we lived in a village in the traditional sense with 150 people. It's just like every year I get new evidence for this
Mm.
hypothesis that I have. Like, like I've seen so many sad people, and it seems like all of these issues could be solved if we just lived as we're supposed to in a like socially instead of isolating.
Mm.
Like in a village with 150 people, as you said, there could be a place for the philosophizing personality,
Mm.
because you know we're all different, and I think everybody has, or like we are different for that reason because it was an evolutionary advantage in the group that you have different people with different abilities.
Yeah, and I think that has a name. I think it's called the Dunbar number, or
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
As from the scientist Dunbar, who was convinced that that was the right number, and
could
actually
be bigger, could be smaller, but I think just living
right,
among people.
and I studied this in my PhD about collective intelligence and communities of thought, etc.
Belonging.
Uh, and what I call well belonging. There is this, we have, I think, in us this nostalgia of being part of a meaningful group, especially in a world where there's a lot of isolation, etc.
Yeah.
Um, I do share that interest, and I do think we need to be part of groups of interest that are based on higher interests, not just self-interest or financial interests. I do also think that we need in our life to have always a relationship with the self such that we never completely fall into the groupthink. So, but you're probably right that our brains are struggling with this global becoming.
Mm.
In a way, that global becoming is inevitable. So, what is the right type of community we should be part of? I think this depends on who we are, what our purpose is.
Yeah.
But the beauty of finding a higher purpose is that they're not, we are 8 billion people on Earth. They're not 8 billion different higher purpose. So the good news is that once you find your higher purpose, you kind of found your community.
Yeah, I have. That's one of my questions for later too.
Okay.
Because you said in the book, like you just said now, that there are like we're 8 billion people, but there's not 8 billion purposes. There's only around 800. So I wonder, like, how did you get to the number of around 800?
Did I say 800 in the book?
Yeah, you said more or less.
Oh, okay. Okay. I don't remember that number, but I think it's just to give an indication, maybe a play with the numbers,
Hmm.
800. Could be less, probably not more. But I want to keep the idea of pluralism, of course. Examples. People might want examples. What's a higher purpose? Okay.
Yeah,
A
yeah,
higher purpose is something, it's a sort of epistemic uh phrase, ideal that you think will bring humanity closer to paradise on earth.
right.
So some people might say justice for all. That's a higher purpose, right? And it's not just about saying it, it's about then being it. You become that truth. And that means that if you think that justice for all will bring people closer to paradise on earth, you become a researcher, right? You're always constantly finding evidence for that, experimenting, and helping people get in that zone. But if everybody's thought like you, there's a chance we would be in a sort of fascism. So I think it's, in my view, is moderately pluralistic, but although I do believe that we need a shared cosmology. And there's a paper from 2017 in which I speak of the creel, and I say, okay, so what do we do? Because on the one hand, we know that um, if we all agree on an absolute, it might become a totalitarian regime.
Right, like
And
Nazi
that's
Germany, they were very aligned in their future goals.
exactly. And so as postmoderns, we've become suspicious of absolutes. However, what we know also from anthropology and psychoanalysis is that humans need an absolute. We cannot live in pure relativism where everything is. And so this is something that I think a lot of people do not understand today.
What do you mean by absolute?
An absolute concept that is something, a truth that you is a sort of a totem for you. You put it, it becomes a figure of the divine for you. Okay.
Okay.
So, uh, in history, there have been a lot of absolutes, of course, God being one of them, but not only. For some people, it's justice. For other people, it might be numbers, right?
Mm.
Mathematicians or. And so we have a dilemma here is that we know that absolute values, one value absolutized is dangerous because it can lead to a totalitarian regime that eliminates pluralism. But on the one
But
hand,
yeah,
we know,
but you're assuming that it's a collective thing. What if one's absolute only pertains to oneself? Then it wouldn't. So you're assuming that it's collective?
yeah, what I'm saying is that if it becomes collective, then if it's only you, then it's not gonna do much in terms of, uh, but if you make it collective, and if everyone follows you, there is a strong chance that it becomes a fascist regime. And if someone else appears with a different absolute, you're going to put that person in jail or kill them.
That's why I like
Right.
libertarianism, because libertarianism and like anarchism is like every individual for themselves, as long as you don't hurt, like Mill's harm principle. If you don't hurt anybody else, then you can do what the fuck you want.
Yeah,
That's why I
but
like that, because it's
yeah, but
compossible.
that's also the problem with that view, and it's the typical capitalist view and Adam's piece, The Invisible Hand, is that it's a strong leap of faith. Like there's this idea that if everyone do what they want, in the end there will be some sort of magic harmony. That's the invisible hand. And I don't agree with that. I think that if we want harmony, we really need to work on it. Compossibility doesn't happen magically. It needs some help. So, and the other thing is that in fact, there is no such thing as human beings that can live without an absolute value. So what happens is that in our capitalist libertarian societies, people are constantly searching for absolutes, right? And they, whether in the figure of a person who represents the father, the savior, whether in returning to Catholicism and oh, Catholicism, this is so new, the Bible, which is an old thing that we tried and created a lot of disasters and foolish wars. So the dilemma is how can we have an absolute, which we need, but one that will not create a dogmatism? And so my argument since many years has been, well, there's only one absolute value that constantly self-destroys and that cannot lead and that respects what you said was dear to you a few minutes ago, which is the fact that people can create their own life. And that absolute is creation. Creation is the only absolute that can perform that. So let's say you are the emperor of Crealia, the kingdom of where creation is the divine. If I come to you and say, Emperor, I found a new way to do things, you cannot put me in jail because I'm just following the principle of the empire. So
Mm,
this is the basis of very, I mean, put it simply, of course, but the basis of my crealectic approach. So as you
mm,
can see, it is kind of it has some values of what you call libertarianism, but at the same time, it doesn't rest fully in the idea that, okay, so if we just follow this thing about creation, then everyone creating their own worlds or everything will fall into place. And this is where the concept of compossibility acts. Is I think as humans, we are creatures of purpose. So we are not only creators of faith, we are creators of action. So faith is important, actually. We need to believe in something. But what we need to do also is uh, how do we then let's say we have a shared cosmology, which is the creal, this creative real. How do we still actualize the best of possible worlds? And that's where the idea of compossibility plays. So this might seem a bit abstract, but if we think about artists, they are a very good model for that because they have the absolute of creation. That's the definition of an artist, right? But they also have in them the idea of compossibility. At least, uh, I think all artists, because you could even say that contemporary artists would seem to be in destruction of the previous harmonies. Well, in order to be in destruction of harmony, you need to know what harmony is. So,
right.
so artists have that idea of, okay, all these possibles, how do I make a network of compatibility between them? How do we make new networks of compatibility? So it could be that what I'm saying is that we need to expand and democratize the psyche of the artist to make a better work.
Mm. Sounds good to me.
Hmm? At least I've convinced you then.
You say like this also. Most of us only think deeply 10% of the time at best. Our brain is wired for specific habits and behaviors, yet the mind has the capacity to transcend these limitations. Anything you want to add to that?
Well, I think it's pretty self-explanatory.
Mm. I think, okay. A long-term sense of purpose has now been experimentally linked to a myriad of physical and mental benefits, including improved cardiovascular health, better immunity, healthier genes, increased antibody levels, longevity, reduced mortality rates, a lower likelihood of stroke, better sleep, greater resilience, decreased stress, and increased life satisfaction with less depressive symptoms. So that was what you mentioned earlier, right?
Right. Exactly.
Yes.
It's almost seems too good to be true, right? But so I'm quoting the what is called the science of purpose.
Mm,
We can there are a lot of publication. We can of course question that, but my experience is that this seems closer to truth than the opposite.
right. One question that I had is because I talk a lot about the meaning of life. Like my podcast touches a lot of on philosophy, and usually how we get into it is the meaning of life. And I see that I have a meaning to my life. Would you say that is similar to purpose, or the same, or not at all?
Right. No, that's a very good question too. So in the small pH method, the two last steps are sense of purpose and philosophical sense. And those two are slightly distinguished in the sense that uh, philosophical sense, in my view, describes your cosmological sense, your the worldview, the beginning of
Mm-hmm.
the explanation you give to the world. So, for
Mm-hmm.
example, if you say, well, ultimately everything is competition, uh, that's a worldview, right? And then
Mm-hmm.
what is interesting is that how your higher purpose aligns with your worldview, right? So
Mm-hmm.
if you think everything is competition, that's in the cosmos, ultimately everything is competing, then you could say, well, someone could say, I want it to be a fair competition. That's my higher purpose. I want to make sure that this cosmological and universal competition is fair. But then, isn't your higher purpose fairness rather than competition? See, so this is the kind of questions that I engage in with people, and it takes some time, right? So it's
If
the
you
sense
want, we
of
can make
meaning.
it concrete. I could give you my meaning of life, and then we have something real to navigate instead of
Exactly.
hypotheticals.
Let's do that.
Okay. So basically, what I see as the meaning of life is relationships, or to put it betterly, um, positive emotional states.
Mhm.
And the reason I said relationships first is because I see that relationships are the key for a human being to achieve positive emotional states.
Right.
Um, so that would be what I see as
Mhm.
the meaning of life. And then, so we have the relationships, and then we have also how I would want to improve society and make it into a better place. So it all ties into hope, I guess. But
Mhm.
so
But
is that my purpose, or is
yeah,
that
it sounds more like a purpose because this is something that you want to help people get closer to, let's say, and not only yourself.
not necessarily though?
Okay.
I think that's how it is for me, but I'm open also to if other people see it differently.
Right. Yeah. So you're not dogmatic about your higher purpose, which is fine. And the higher purpose is there is an element of personal, but it also, if to qualify for a higher purpose, it needs to have this. You said I mentioned Kant in the book, what Kant called the universalization principle. So the fact that you assume that it would be good if it's universalized. Okay. So this idea that, okay, if everyone had positive emotional states most of the time, then the world would be a better place. Uh, what is interesting then would be to work on what kind of philosophical sense that supports it, right? And
Mm.
then you would need to, first of all, there's something that a lot of people find difficult is to step out of the human species because it's sort of a cosmological view needs to be valid beyond the human experience. So one thing that could work is that if you say, well, since you talked about relations, right?
Yeah.
You could say, well, my worldview, my cosmological view is that everything is interconnected and therefore in constant interaction, and that interaction is felt
Mm.
before it is processed in another way. And but then one would ask you, okay, so where does the feeling of something as positive or negative starts? Does it start at the level of the plant? Does it start at the level of the animal? Does it start at the level of the stone? So Whitehead, Alfred North Whitehead, who was a famous process philosopher who believed
Mm.
also that creativity was the source, the ultimate in the universe. He thought that even stones have a sort of a proto way of feeling things.
What if I just draw the line at humans?
If you just draw the line at humans, then it means if your cosmology says it's based on humans, then you need to admit that you view the human race as the child of the universe. So like we are designed in the universe by whatever uh, principle we define as the core of the universe to be the sort of like the saviors of the universe, right? And so a lot of religions do that. But you see what I mean? Is like the if
Yeah.
the
You mean that
cosmology
I have
put
to,
human in the center,
yeah.
we are the
You mean
children.
that I have to include everything in my vision for a better society? I have to take into account
Yeah,
everything.
well, not necessarily in your mission for a better society, because you could say, I focus on humans. That's the purpose. But we were talking about the philosophical sense with the cosmology, which is above, which is the explanation you give for the universe. And that needs to include all forms of life and even forms of matter. And then once you have that, let's say it's interconnectedness, then you can say, okay, I focus my work on human. But
I don't
there's
know.
one,
I don't know if we're interconnected, but like we don't really know why there is something rather than nothing, right? So we would only be guessing. Like, why is there matter instead of nothing? We don't have the answer to that.
well, I do in my cosmology, I do.
What is the answer then?
Well, okay, so first of all, there is a book called Being a Neonness that was published by MIT Press, first in French, but in translation by MIT Press. And in that book, I sort of uh, sketch the cosmology that I was briefly talking about, the creal, the one, and the multiple. And so you have in the universe, you have this dynamo between the one and the multiple, between the creal as pure possibility, infinite flow of possibility, and the one, right, as unification. And so what happens is that, well, since these two are contradictory, but they are the same, it creates a constant movement of actualization, of things, of possibilities becoming one. And possibilities becoming one is the beginning of what we call matter or real. Okay. And what is the real? Well, we could say it's relational to. We could try to agree with your view of interconnectedness and say that something is only real for a perception, right? It's the famous paradox, of what noise does a tree that falls in a desert forest makes, right? You need to have
Yeah,
a perceiver, you need to have an observer. Um, and so
but this
it's
my view is like I love philosophy, but I have a very niche interest in philosophy, and it's practical philosophy.
right.
Um, like while that's all interesting questions and all, it's quite theoretical, and most people can't relate to it. So that's why I always approach it very practically, like the meaning to life and like that.
Yeah, and I think it's well, the meaning to life doesn't seem very practical. It seems quite
I
speculative.
think I
But
think it's extremely practical because that's like you say in the book. Then you have a goal for your life that you can navigate everything after, so everything falls into its place.
yeah, but what I mean is that in order to be able to deal with pragmatic questions, you need to have a top-down approach. It's like you need to sort
Yeah,
out the theoretical, at least even if it's in a simplified way, such that then you know, because the practical realm is not separated from the spiritual realm. Every small practical decision, in fact, is dependent on an ideology. Uh, I was going to say, should I kill this fly or not? right? Very practical. We are in the summer in Sweden. A lot
Mm.
of houses have this banana fly, that, as the Swedish called it, right?
Yeah.
Kill the flies or not? A Buddhist would say, I don't kill the flies. Right? So
Yeah.
that's a very practical thing, right?
Yeah.
And so
But
the
that's where I mean that the baseline that everybody starts their game at is, whoa, I'm born into this life. I have a body. I'm a
right.
person. These are the genes I have. I have to get to know myself. I have to learn what works for me, what doesn't work for me.
Yeah.
So there's like the start of the game. I don't really care what happened in the universe or whatever. I'm here now. This is it. How do I make the best of this situation?
Yeah, but
Do I
that's
kill the
like
banana fly? Yeah, I'm
survival.
gonna kill the banana fly because it's gonna make my life better.
That sounds like survival mode. Precisely what philosophical health does is like you've spent the first decades of your life reacting. It is time to act. And the difference between reacting and acting is that you can react without a plan. You cannot act without a plan. And you cannot have a plan if you don't have a big overview of what's the territory, what's the world. So the idea is not to spend the next 30 years of your life thinking about what is the cosmology, what's the ultimate explanation of the universe. Some scientists might find it interesting, or even speculative philosophers. The idea is to sort that out because it will prevent you from doing a lot of mistakes in everyday life.
So
Because
you mean
once you
that
know, yeah, it's a
you,
top-down approach. You need to go all the way up,
do
then
you
to
feel that
come
I'm
back.
coming in the middle somewhere?
If you stay in the middle, you didn't go up on the top of the mountain. So
Is that is
you
that how you feel when I start with the meaning of life? Do you feel like that's somewhere here whereas I should go higher? Is that your point?
well, the phrase meaning of life for me is pretty close to what I mean by philosophical sense. So if you say, "Oh, I want the meaning of life, but I don't care about anything that's not human," it sounds a little bit strange. So, in fact, if you really care about the meaning of life, you want to be able to speculate at one point and have some sort of a overview. But then I completely understand that you don't want to stay there. I'm call myself an action philosopher. I also like to transform the world. Uh,
Mm,
but I think it wouldn't be honest if I didn't have a cosmology, because I would not really know if I'm just reacting, if I'm just in the human realm with my human preoccupations, unaware of the big picture. Now, if you ask me, but you don't really know if your big picture is true, and that's true. It's an hypothesis, but it's an hypothesis that I found is the most compatible with a lot of even scientific findings, whether it's evolutionary theory, but also quantum physics,
mm,
string theory, which we it's not fully accepted, but so uh, there is a I think there is a constant negotiation between what is valid for you
mm,
and what is commonly accepted, and I think both are important because otherwise you can be in this side of psychosis where you're going to invent a strange theory that is totally unprovable and that
mm,
might actually disconnect you from your fellow humans, and you might end up in a very bad situation, like a psychotic situation. I'm not talking about you, right? I'm
mm.
talking about other cases that I have.
But
Uh,
if they're happy, what would be the issue if
they're
that
not
person is happy?
they're
They're
not
not
happy.
happy.
I mean, if they're happy and their relationships with their fellow humans work, then it very is often the case that in fact they are pretty reasonable in
Mm,
the articulation of their highest theories with the rest of the world.
mm,
Is there a theory, like let's say you think that you are in a simulation, and actually not only you are in a computer simulation, but the computer has chosen you. You are
mm.
the chosen one. Everyone else is not really existing. What do you think will happen? Well, over the time, you're probably going to feel pretty isolated, pretty delusional, and disconnected from your fellows, which you think are just projections of the the Matrix. Maybe
Sorry,
that was a call from the Matrix.
go. Sorry. Please continue. I was still there listening.
Yeah. So that's why I use philosophy and I don't use New Age stories, etc. Is that philosophy is a long tradition.
Mm,
Respect all these humans before us that have been in dialogue. We are in dialogue with them. We also respect science without fetishizing it, without we're not taking anyone and becoming a dogmatic follower of a particular philosophy. I've never been like that.
mm,
So it's a constant dialectic between our own sense of autonomous thinking and a respect for the tradition, because, for example, in your worldview, and this is what you're doing with your podcast, you're respecting
yes.
the voices, and I think this is, of course, we are one mind dialoguing, and many of ideas, they're not, again, they're not 8 billion different ideas. It's a conversation that has a lot of common ground.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Do you have time for a few more questions, or
We
what do you
can,
think?
yeah, let's spend another 15, 20 minutes, if that's, if,
Okay. Yes, I'd love that. I do have some questions about, you talked a little bit about Sweden in the book, and being a Sweden and belonging and stuff. And I think this I'm just obsessed by this topic of belonging. Also, I apologize in advance for the dog noises if there's going to be any, because I'm
no
babysitting a dog.
worries. I didn't know it
Uh,
was a dog. Now I know.
yeah, so belonging, I think it's a fascinating topic because it ties into so much of the human experience.
Right.
First of all, we're extremely social animals, and then like all of society and happiness is impossible without humans, as far as we know,
Yep.
like without friends. And so it ties also into nationalism,
Mm. Yep.
and like and the society. So I'm gonna kind of go in
That's
with
good.
that first.
I'm just gonna show you something if I reach. Um,
Yeah.
that I wrote a book about that. So it's called Ensemblance.
Oh,
As I can see by the cover, uh,
yeah.
I mean,
There you go.
and so why did I call it Ensemble? The transnational genealogy of Esprit de Corps. And there's a lot about nationalism there, about belonging,
Wow.
and I call it Ensemblance. It's a playing with words. I like to play with words, but it's, of course, if you hide this, you have semblance.
Mm.
So it's the idea that no matter how strong a human group looks like and feels like, it's always an ensemblance. It's always a, we should never think that it represents the entire world. However, we do need belonging. It's an extremely strong drive in us,
Yes.
right?
Like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, like belonging is like third or something.
Right. And so, in esprit de corps, which is a term that is usually originally French, but
Hmm.
been adopted in English language, actually, it's more used now in English than French, the same French phrase. There's this idea that you commit so much to a group that you are ready to sacrifice for that group.
Was that what S3 the core means?
Yeah, exactly. So it's like you put your mind a second uh, to serve the cause. And this is very, in a way, it's very beautiful and can be also scary, right? Uh,
Yeah, I'm thinking
funny,
directly 1930s Germany.
exactly. The funny anecdote is that um, when I started my research, some people told me, "Oh, that seems pretty niche. Is that important?" Blah blah. And this was in 2000. I started in 2014, and 1, 2 years after I started. It was the Brexit debate, right?
Mm,
And suddenly the minister for the Brexit campaign started using the term esprit de corps. He was saying, "Oh, the UK doesn't have enough national esprit de corps," and people
hmm.
thought, "Oh yeah, maybe it's not so niche." And then 1 year after, in his campaign, Donald Trump
Yeah.
starting making speeches, not in every of his speech, but in at least I found two of them where he said, "Oh, I will bring esprit de corps to America."
Oh, really? He said
It
that?
was a hot topic, exactly, and I don't know who advised him to say that. I didn't, but
Damn. Because
suddenly it was.
he
Mhm.
usually uses very simplistic language, Donald Trump, and he
Exactly,
says the same sentence at least like two, three times.
exactly. That doesn't sound like Trump, right? I
No,
isolated
no.
that speech. I put it on my YouTube channel, and of course, it was deleted. A few
Oh.
months later, I don't know if it was the CIA, FBI, quite proud of it, when he was elected. And I don't know why. I mean, I was just putting his speech, so there was no judgment about that. I was
Yeah,
just putting it, and it's what I call the question of well-belonging is extremely important, and that's why one of the philosophical senses is a sense of belonging.
yeah,
It's something we need to constantly negotiate. My view is that again, the golden mean, right? The finding the right community that is a community of thought that basically people who align with your higher purpose. Rather than because if you don't, you will be driven to belong to a community that might be toxic for you because we need to belong.
right, right. Unless, I don't know, I'm very individualistic in some way. I would think that what if you have your family and you go to sport sometimes, you hang out with friends, isn't that kind of enough belonging? Or
Well, I mean, if you have a strong belonging to your family, you're
yeah,
not really individualistic because, right? And we know how family can be destructive for individual desires, right? So, of
yeah,
course,
true.
a healthy love story is enough, a healthy
Okay.
friendship, right? So all that is belonging, and people can belong to non-human relations, nature. So you
Oh,
said
cool.
that I live in Sweden. Uh, there's this cliche that I spent most of my life in France. There's this cliche that people come to Sweden because they fall in love with a Swedish girl or a Swedish guy. And,
Mm.
it was not my case. In my case, I came to Sweden when I was 21, 22. In 94, it was when Sweden was in the final of the football World Championship, and I'm not into football, but that situates. And
84, you said, 1984.
1994.
94, okay.
Uh, and I came to
Maybe I
Sweden.
can read your quote. I can read your quote from the book because
Yeah,
it's would
go
be
ahead. Go
fitting.
ahead.
Heimat is a German term that is somewhat difficult to translate directly into English because it encompasses a range of meanings and emotions. At its core, it refers to a place or space where one's soul feels at home, safe, and connected. It's not just a geographic location, but a deep emotional connection to a place that provides a sense of belonging. Such is the feeling that I continue to experience starkly as I now have been living in Sweden for many years. Perhaps it's the strong presence of nature or the relative peacefulness of existential rhythms.
There you go. Very good. I can see you read the book carefully because you can even finish my sentences.
Yes, but I do have questions about this aspect because we've talked about belonging, but there's also the belonging to the bigger groups, right? Like belonging to the bigger group, so like the nation or like humanity. And so I wonder, um, like you said that you like the peacefulness of existential rhythms in Sweden, but what does
Mhm.
that really mean?
Well, I think Sweden gives me a whole lot of the forms of belonging I need. So natural, because if you come from France, you come from and it's more like this. You come from a zone where it's overcrowded. Nature is
Yeah.
considered as the enemy. Traditionally, is we divide. human society from nature. Nature can always harm you. And well, in Sweden, if you see even the geography, you can see that there is always a smooth transition between nature and
Mm,
human civilization. The other thing is that I do believe that the um, the proportion of human beings in comparison to the nature is to my convenience in the sense that, well, 10 million people in a surface that is quite significant. But the other thing is that I think that people themselves are, in general, and the Swedish culture has a sense of distance that I relate to. I find quite healthy. Is that people are not in your face. People know. There's this joke about COVID, right? When two Swedish people after COVID, they're talking and they say, "Oh, we don't have that 2 meter distance restriction anymore. We can go back to 3 meters." And but I like actually this fact that people are polite and they respect the sort of space, and that I find very pleasant. Nevertheless, I think that there is also in Sweden the idea that let's, as a community, let's, as a society, think about what is a better world. And and what I also like is that the solutions that are found are hybrid. They're both human, but they also include technology in a way
mm,
that's rather harmonious. Uh, but of course, in everything that I've done, I have this idea of working for the humanity that comes, what is sometimes called generativity. So the idea that
mm.
what you do, people might not understand it as you do it, but you're working for. So in that sense, it's humanity as a whole, right?
Yeah, yeah,
I'm not working for the Swedish nation in particular, uh,
right.
but for humanity as a whole. But I do think, and of course, it's a luxury, right? Because people in overcrowded zones of the world, they might say, okay, that's very fine, but we are overcrowded. So what do we do? Well, this is maybe for another program where we should discuss, uh,
Yeah, yeah.
right?
I can read your other book, and then we can maybe have
Exactly.
another call at some point because it's a huge topic, obviously.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That's good.
Okay. Okay. What a nice note to end it on. I want to thank you so much, Dr. Miranda, for like taking the time and sharing some of your wisdom.
Well, thanks a lot for this conversation, and I like your suggestion of keeping the conversation going and giving it an extension at another occasion. Thank you
Yes.
for
Where can people go in to find the book?
yeah. So the philosophical health book can be found in all good and bad libraries, good and bad digital platforms. It's also since it's a very new book. I think Bloomsbury, the publisher, has a special price on it, so you can buy it on Amazon .se for like
Hmm.
under 200 crowns if you're Swedish.
Nice. I'll put a link in the description. We'll figure that out. Is there an audiobook version?
Not yet, but there is there is this paperback version, so that is cheaper. You can also, if you like hardcovers, you can also have a solid hardcover version. And I think that one important aspect that we didn't mention is that the book is absolutely not meant as a recipe for life that should be like an algorithm that you so it's a mind opener, and you did I was very touched when you wrote to me that it encouraged you to remain faithful to your highest dreams, right, or highest
Yes.
aspirations. And that's,
Yes.
I remember what I answered to you. I said, it's worth it because that's what I have done, and I'm 52, and it takes a lot of courage, and on that note, I would like to finish, is that, of course, having a philosophically healthy life takes some courage. There's a form of mental heroism.
Mm.
But on the other hand, doesn't it take courage even to have a meaningless life? Perhaps
Yeah.
even.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. All right. Thanks so much. And thanks for watching, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.